Good morning. My name is Levi. I am the assistant pastor here at Grace, and we are glad that you are here worshiping today. And my sermon is not going to be as good as that dance, all right? So let's set the expectation there. We are in a year-long series looking at the life of Jesus, not just chronologically, but looking at who Jesus is through some different lenses and some different filters. And so right now, we are looking at Jesus as the greatest leader, not so that you can take some tips and run a better staff meeting or board meeting, but so that we can understand who Jesus is. And as we understand who he is, we understand who he is calling us to be. If you have gotten behind or you're a guest with us, you can go and watch these, the past sermons all over the place on our website, our app, Facebook, YouTube. You would have to look in all the wrong places not to be able to find us. So we encourage you to check up on that. I want to take you back a little bit down memory lane, and I want you to go back to your elementary school in your mind's eye. And as you go back to, some of you are like, that is a long time ago. Go back to recess in your elementary school. This seems to be something that has stayed true through the years. I remember when we went out to recess, we would figure out what sport we were going to play that day, and say we were going to play football. Well, everybody that was going to play football would begin to yell the names of a couple guys who were going to be the captains, because they were clearly the best football players in the talent pool that day, and you had to make them captains so that they would not be on each other's teams. Not at me if this is ringing a bell for you, okay? Some of you are like, nope, I was like sitting against the wall during recess. I did not get involved in those shenanigans. But for those of you that did, you remember what it was like, because the first captain would get his pick, and say his name was Tom. He would look and he says, I choose Sam. And Sam kind of strolls up because Sam knew that he was going to be a first round draft choice, because Sam is right on the cusp of being a captain himself. So nobody was surprised when Sam got chosen. And then John and Ralph and on it goes. And then slowly, everybody's making their way to this team or to that team. And then it starts to get down to like the final four. And I don't know about you, but that's when my chest always started getting tight. I hated the end of the recess draft. And I'm going to be honest, it wasn't because I was necessarily still standing there. I was a decent little athlete and usually got picked in the first 2 or 3 rounds. And so I remember there was a child, this moment of looking at these 4 that were left and just hating it. And then the 4th one goes and the 3rd one goes. And then it's down to the last 2. And then there's going to be this moment where the next to the last person is chosen, and that last person doesn't even get picked. Because I never remember that last captain saying to the last child that was standing there, I choose you. They never said that. They would say something like, oh, come on, you're on our team. Kind of like, we have to let you play, And so there is this thing inside of us where we simply want to be chosen. And as we look back at our elementary school, we realize that it kind of sets us up for a lot of life. In 5th grade now, you don't just go to 6th grade. You apply to get into a special program that starts in 6th grade. And if you have the right test scores and the right grades, then you may get in, or you may get waitlisted, or you may not even get that. And then you go through elementary school, in middle school, and at the end of middle school, I would just go to the high school that was closest to my house. There was no essays to write. There was no selling myself to get into a special program. It was just wherever the closest school was, that's where you went. That's not how it works anymore. You apply to get into the entrepreneurship program or the IB program or dual enrolled at a local community college or the Cambridge program. And so you're filling out all of this stuff, trying to sell yourself to get into the right program that is going to set you up for your future. Then you finish high school. And many of you remember applying to different universities and hoping against hope that you could get into this one, but you would settle for this one. And so you do the application, and then the letters begin to come in. And there's the the little letterhead from the university admissions office. And with great trepidation, you begin to cut those open because it's going to have one of two things for you. Congratulations, you have been accepted into the class of whatever is 4 years from when you get that letter. For some of you, it's the class of 65. And for some of you, it's going to be a little more updated than that. But then there was also the chance that you were going to open that letter and it was going to say, thank you for your application, but unfortunately, we have chosen for you, you're not going to attend here. They say it nicer than that, but they say, you have not been chosen to be a part of the class of whatever. And then you hope that they don't all come back that way. And then we make our way through life, and there's the relationship thing. You choose someone, and you want to go out with them. You want to go out on a date with them. But that's only half the battle because, as we all know, that person needs to want to go out on a date with you also. That's how this works, all right? And some of you are like, I know that all too well. And in olden days, we used to do this face-to-face. Usually a guy would walk up to a gal and say, hey, do you want to go out to dinner? And they knew, that either yes or no. Now you don't really do that. You download an app, the way that I understand it, and you put your profile in there, and there's a particular app that if you are interested in the person, you will swipe this way. And if you're not interested in that person, you swipe that way. Anybody know the name of this app? You don't want to say. You're like, no idea, no clue. Never heard of it. This is the first I've ever heard of this crazy app you're talking about. You're updating your profile right now. But if you swipe this way, but the other person swipes this way, you are not a match. But if you both swipe this way, woohoo, dinner could be in your future. And so you just want to be chosen. And so today what we're going to look at is Jesus and the 12 guys that he chose to be a part of his team. And there's a scripture in Luke 6. It'll be on the screen, and you can follow along. It says, he was there all night in prayer before God. The next day, he summoned his disciples. From them, he selected 12 he designated as apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, Andrew, his brother, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now get this. Usually what would happen is there would be the best and the brightest, and they would apply to follow a particular religious teacher or a rabbi, and you wanted to be selected. And so there was a good talent pool of these bright minds who had a natural knack for the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And the top rabbis would select from these groups. But what Jesus did is something completely different. Is that it is as if he scanned the playground of the talent pool of people he could choose to be followers, and he doesn't even play from that talent pool. He turns over here and goes to all the kids that are hanging out, sitting up next to the building or just hanging out during recess. They weren't the best of the best. They weren't the brightest. They weren't winning awards, and they weren't scholar athletes, the people that he was choosing from. It would be as if say the Orlando Magic got the 10th pick in the next draft. And you're at the draft, and they say, and with the 10th pick, the Orlando Magic, they choose John Robinson. And the camera, they scans the room. There's no John Robinson. John Robinson is so far off the radar that they don't even have a camera set up in his house where he's watching with his family, because John Robinson works IT in Southern California and hasn't played basketball since his senior year of high school. He is on nobody's radar because he hasn't played basketball in like 6 or 7 years. But the Orlando Magic are like, we choose him. We see potential in this guy that nobody else sees. This is essentially what Jesus did. He essentially went to a talent pool that wasn't a talent pool and said, I choose you, and you. And it's really interesting. When we begin to dig into who these men were, all of the cynics, all of the talking heads, they would have been shaking their heads saying, this guy messed up royally. This team doesn't stand a chance. And so what I want to do this morning is I've got some helpers that are going to help me, and we're going to talk through who some of these disciples were. So as these kids come up and they hold a sign, I want you to imagine that they're just a few years older than they are right now. We suspect that most of these disciples were between the ages of 14 and 20 when Jesus said, I choose you, I choose you, I choose you. So what I need is Simon Peter, I need John, and I need James, not James the Lesser, the other James. All right, you guys come up here. You stand right here, okay? Stand right here. Hold your sign up like this so that they can see you. Oh, other way. There you go. All right. Yeah, you stand right here. Yep, just like she's doing. Oh, you got to hold your sign up. There we go. Rule number 1 of being a disciple, you got to hold your sign up. All right, so these three we actually know quite a bit about. We've got Simon Peter. He is the loudmouth. He was a fisherman. He was this roller coaster disciple that was often getting it right, but was also often getting it terribly wrong. He is the one that when Jesus says, who do you say that I am? He says, I say that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And all the others think, wow, this guy's crazy. And Jesus says, correct answer. But he is also the one that sinks in the ocean. He's also the one that denies knowing Jesus on that fateful night. And so Peter is a Galilean. And the historian Josephus says, Galileans were ever fond of innovation, and by nature were disposed to change and delighted in sedition, separation. They were ever ready to follow the leader and begin an insurrection. They were quick in temper and given to quarreling, and they were very chivalrous men. And so we know a lot about Simon Peter. James, the elder, he was the oldest of the two James that Jesus selected. He was always connected to his brother John. They're like peanut butter and jelly. You have, often you hear of Peter, James, and John. And they were part of the inner circle. These were the three disciples that were the closest to Jesus. The other 9 were certainly there, but at times he would call these off for special times of prayer or instruction or friendship. And so we have James the elder. He was a man of great forgiveness. Are you a man of great forgiveness? All right, enough said. And he was comfortable leading from the second chair. He lived in the shadow of his brother. It's believed that he was the very first disciple that gave his life for the message of Jesus. All right, and then there's John, son of Zebedee and Salome. He was obviously the brother of James. He was known as the beloved disciple, the one that Jesus was the very, very closest to. He was a fisherman and also, of course, was a member of the inner three. He is credited with writing the Gospel of John, the 3 epistles, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and also the book of Revelation. He was banished to the Isle of Patmos where he wrote that. And he was later freed, and it's believed that he was the only disciple that died a natural death. He was an ambitious man with an explosive temper and intolerant heart. His middle name was Boanerges, which means son of thunder. Son of thunder. Who has the foresight to give their kid that name, right? Not me. I've thought about maybe we should have given Keegan that middle name. Keegan, son of thunder, Lowry. Because he can be very, very passionate at times. And some of you have children who can be passionate. And so this was who he was. History tells us that he mellowed with time. And at the latter part of his life, he set everything aside, including his ambition, his explosive temper. He set everything aside except his Lord's command to love. Now, you guys stay put, all right? Now, I need Andrew. Andrew, come on up. All right. Andrew, if you'll just stand right here, you guys are almost done, all right? Andrew is the brother of loudmouth Peter. He was just a regular dude. He was a fisherman by trade and was originally a disciple of John the Baptist. He was originally one who was following John the Baptist and realized, John is just pointing the way to this other guy. This other guy is where it's at. He introduced people to Jesus, and again, he was not this upfront person. He was very comfortable leading from the back. And then Philip. Where are you, Philip? Come on up. Philip, I'm going to group Philip with these four because he came from Bethsaida, the same town where Peter and Andrew grew up. And the likelihood is that they were contemporaries and that he too was a fisherman. It's said that he was a man with a warm heart but a pessimistic head. He was the one who would very much like to do something for others but did not see how it could be done. I wonder if there's anybody like that. Like, I would really like to do something. I don't see how it's possible. I don't think, I would really like to make it. No, can't do it. That's basically who he was. All right, so this is what I need you guys to do. Just set your papers down where you stand and make your way down. If we can give them a hand as they are on their way down. I'm going to call two more, all right? James the Lesser and Jude. If you have a sign that says James the Lesser and Jude, come on up exactly where they were standing. So James was obviously these two are brothers. Yeah, come on up, and then you're going to just stand right in front of all this paper. You guys are awesome, all right? I love that our smallest disciple in the bunch got James the Lesser. That's awesome. He lived in Galilee, and according to tradition, he may have written the epistle of James. He went on to preach in Palestine and Egypt, and he was, again, one of the disciples that we don't know a whole lot about. Now, Jude is interesting. Jude is called by three different names in the New Testament. In Mark, he's called Thaddeus. In Matthew, he's called Lebbaeus. In Luke, he's called Judas, the brother of James. So Judas, Thaddeus, Lebbaeus, he may have had multiple personalities. I don't know what was going on with this guy. But by character, he was an intense and violent nationalist. He dreamt of world power and domination by God's chosen people. He's like, the Messiah's here, good news, because I want to be on that team, because when he raises up an army and he's ready to kick some tail and take some names, I want to be on that team. It said that Jude was interested in making Christ known to the world, but not as a suffering servant, but as a ruling king. And an interesting thing happened. His heart softened. He went on to preach the gospel to many. He healed many, and many believed in the name of Jesus because of him. Let's give them a hand. You guys can set your signs down. All right, I'm going to ask Bartholomew and Matthew if you would come up. A little faster? No, just kidding. Awesome. All right, which one are you, Bartholomew? I'm going to call you Bart for short. No, Bartholomew it is. I saw that look. No nicknames. So, all right. Matthew is coming, and Matthew looks suspiciously like Simon Peter from a few moments ago. Bartholomew was from Galilee, went on to be a missionary in Armenia, thought to be the only disciple who may have come from royal blood or noble birth. He was a great researcher and scholar of the law and the prophets. So Bartholomew would have sat under some very hard teachings from Jesus when Jesus began to teach in this way. You have heard it said in the law and the prophets, where he was an expert, but I say unto you. You have heard it said, but I say unto you, a new day has dawned, and what you have known before now, a new day has come, and it is all different. He ended up being an adventurous missionary in India and gave his life for the gospel of Christ. Now, Matthew, or known as Levi, lived in Capernaum. He was a publican or a tax collector, and the King James Version uses the word publican, and so he engaged in public service, handled public money, and was a tax gatherer. Let me tell you something. Imagine how much most people, I won't make you internalize this, but most people are not huge fans of the IRS, right? That day is coming, and we're either going to write a check, or if you've overpaid, you're going to get some back, and you've basically loaned the government your money, interest-free. I digress. But they could not stand tax collectors. They hated tax collectors because they basically said the only person who should have a right to our money is God, and anybody else is an imposter. And aside from that, tax collectors were known to be incredibly greedy, and they would basically overcharge because they had a certain sum that they had to turn in. So if they had to turn in 30, they could charge you 60, and they could pocket the rest. It was not quite as structured and as complicated as it is now. So Matthew was a hated man. But he was an educated man, and he could work a pen. And he was the first man to present to the world in the Hebrew language an account of the teaching of Jesus. It would be impossible to measure the impact that Christianity has had because of this despised tax collector. The average man would have thought it impossible to reform Matthew, but to God, all things are possible. He was a missionary of the gospel who also laid down his life for the sake of the gospel. All right, give them a hand. You guys are out of here. You can set it down. All right, let me have Simon the Zealot. All right, come on, Simon the Zealot. Nice. Simon the Zealot, we don't know a whole lot about him other than there's a good description of who he is right there in his name. The Zealots were fanatical Jewish nationalists who had a heroic disregard for the suffering involved or the struggle for what they regarded as the purity of their faith. Josephus says that Zealots were reckless persons. You don't look reckless to me. They were reckless persons, zealous in good practices and extravagant and reckless in the worst kind of actions. These are people who there would be no higher honor than to take out a Roman soldier or a Roman citizen in the name of God. When we say he was a zealot, Simon the Zealot was intense. And let me tell you who Simon the Zealot would have had a really hard time being on the same team with: Matthew the tax collector. In those early days, Matthew the tax collector would have been very, very wise to watch his back if Simon the Zealot was on the road behind him, because they did not see eye to eye on anything. It says he abandoned all of his hatred for the faith, he showed towards his master, and the love he was willing to share with the rest of the disciples, especially Matthew. This is a man whose heart was changed. All right, you can put it down. You can make your way down. I'm going to ask the last two, Thomas and Judas, if you guys would come up together. Thomas, a lot of us know about Thomas. Tradition says that he went on to preach the gospel in Parthia, Persia, and India. Thomas was his Hebrew name, and Didymus. So Thomas Didymus was his Greek name. And poor Thomas. Thomas is known for one thing. What do we call him? On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. This poor guy is just like you and me. His buddies are like, Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. He's like, yeah, but I saw Jesus die. So he was dead. So he's not alive. So I don't believe it. So he doubted that the resurrection had happened. And so for all of eternity, we call him Doubting Thomas. Well, guess what? You very easily could have been doubting Levi or Kathy or Amy or Rick or anybody else, because it's not so far-fetched to think that someone who was dead would stay dead, because that's how it had always happened. But Thomas, when he encountered the risen Lord and was able to touch his wounds and his scars, he says, "My Lord and my God." And he went on to spread the gospel in southern India, where he eventually gave his life for the message of Jesus. And as I was telling Rick some of this research that was coming out, I was like, this is crazy. Like southern India, that is a long ways away. He goes, Levi, they still talk about Thomas to this day. 2,000 years later, people in southern India know who Thomas the Doubter was. God did something in him. And then there's Judas. Sorry, Ty boy, you Holly owes you. She gave you Judas Iscariot. That's bad news right there. In the 8 o'clock, Pastor Rick was Judas. But he's the enigma of the New Testament. It's so hard for us in hindsight to understand how someone who spent so much time with Jesus, who saw the miracles and the signs, saw the compassion that he had for others, would choose to betray him for 30 pieces of silver. And so we know that Thomas died. He ended up taking his own life. And it's one of those stories that's just kind of hard to comprehend. All right, you guys can set down your papers and make your way down. Thank you. And as I began to look at the whole of this team that Jesus assembled, I realized a couple of things. I realized that these guys were not perfect. Some of them were very, very extreme in their beliefs. This idea of a Messiah who would come to lay down his life was on none of their radar. And some of them wanted to be on Team Jesus because they could posture once they got on his team to be something greater in the kingdom that he was going to come to establish. But he came to establish a kingdom that was different than anything they had ever seen. And so they were way out here, and they were way out here. And one of the things that we've been talking about as a staff is we need to be careful to not write people off who have beliefs that seem very extreme and very antithetical to the message of Jesus. Because sometimes we can have that friend that is an atheist and just hates any talk of anything God because it is beyond all reason. And we say, well, that person, there's no point in talking to them about Jesus because they're just not open to it and they don't want to hear it. Or you have people that, some of you work in science or medicine, and so everything is very quantifiable, and it's these people don't want anything to do with any of this God talk. And so one of the things that Rick has been encouraging us to do is to not write people off who are at these extremes, because some of the people that Jesus picked to spread his message into all the world were people who held some unbelievably extreme beliefs. This was not a homogenous group. There was no group think here. And these guys didn't get it all together as soon as they began following Jesus. We begin to see where they get the answers wrong. They begin posturing for position within those 12. Hey, Jesus, who, when you establish this kingdom and everything's like up and running, who's going to be sitting on your right and who's going to be sitting on your left? Because, well, we got a pretty good idea who would be, good for the right and good for the left. This is after they decided to follow Jesus. So here's the thing. There is room for anyone on Team Jesus. People with anger issues, people with misplaced trust. There's room for doubters. There's room for deniers. There's room for upfront people. There's room for behind the scenes people. There's room for educated. There's room for uneducated. There's room for people of means. There's room for people with a lack of means. If you are here today and you have been making up excuses as to why you are not a good fit for Team Jesus, you don't have an excuse. There is no belief or no thing that you have done that is so extreme that it disqualifies you from becoming a follower of Jesus. Every single person, there is an invitation extended to you to be a part of Team Jesus. And you're going, no way. And to that I say, yes way. Yes, you are invited. We said this a few weeks ago. We invite you to just begin following. And we believe that as you begin to follow Jesus with a group of other Jesus followers, that some of the belief will come in time. I think we've done it backwards. We said you have to believe this and then you can follow. I think a better way of looking at it is follow, and then the belief will come later. There is room for everyone on Team Jesus. And the second thing that stood out to me was this. Jesus built a team with a bunch of guys with different agendas, political beliefs, levels of education, and opinions. There were guys that were on this team of 12 that stood in direct opposition of each other on some major issues. So wouldn't it be crazy? Wouldn't it be following in the way of Jesus for Jesus to invite some people today who stand over here on this issue, let's just say, in support of guns, while also inviting someone to be a part of Team Jesus who stands on the other side of that issue? Wouldn't it be crazy if Jesus would say, I'm going to invite some people that are way over here on the right side of the political spectrum. They watch all of these news stations, but you know what? I'm not just going to invite those people. I'm also going to invite some people to be on my team who are over here, and they're on the far left of the political spectrum. Man, it's quiet in here. Just like in picking his original 12, Jesus has selected us to be on his team. And there are some of us that at the name of Colin Kaepernick, we say, yeah, he's doing a right thing. He is drawing attention to an issue that has been squelched for far too long. And then there's people that are sitting in the same row as you who are saying, I can't believe you would even say his name in church. That is a man to be despised. He's disgusting. But the thing is, we are all on Team Jesus. And I said this in a sermon about a year ago. Sometimes we have got to be able to put these issues aside and agree on Jesus. We've got to put these things aside. And let me tell you this, we need people in our lives who hold different opinions than us. Some of us who have friends that are here and we are over here, it is time for you to sit down over a dinner in a home, not to convince each other that your position is right, but to say, would you please just tell me your heart in this? Where are you coming from when you hold this belief? Because I want to understand. I need empathy for you because we're on the same team, and right now it doesn't feel like it. You see, because when we begin to surround ourselves with people who think just like we do, we begin to lose empathy for our brother and sister. We begin to lose the ability to understand where they are coming from. And this is a beautiful thing. Jesus has selected to be on the same team. And here's the thing. He believes that we can put that stuff aside. He believes that we can come together and we can do what he commanded us to do, to be disciples who go into all the world making disciples. As I was preparing for this, I came across this video clip that puts a spin on this. And I want us to watch this together as we close our time this morning. While we believe in Jesus, he believes in us. He's invited us to be on Team Jesus, and he believes that we can be disciples who make disciples, like he said. He charges them with doing this thing, and what do? They go and they do it. I want to close with this image. I pulled this this week, and it's a map. And everywhere that you see one of those dots, there's a yellow one because there's lots of conflicting reports. But if you were to zoom in on this, there's even some more under that grouping of 3 there. But this is where 10 of the 12 disciples died for the sake of Christ. And you can see how this thing spread all the way up into Italy, Greece, over into Ethiopia, and in India, where each of them, something changed inside of this bumbling, fumbling group of men to where they went out. And we are sitting here today because of the work that they did. We believe in God. He believes that he has called us to be his people, to be a part of his team, and to live out the gospel of Christ. Let's pray. Father, thank you Thank you for inviting each of us to be a part of Team Jesus, that there's no belief that we have, there's no behavior that we're addicted to, there's no thing that we have done, there's no thing that we have said that disqualifies us from joining up with you. And God, for those of us who have said, yes, I surrender my life to the way of Jesus, but then we find ourselves at odds with some of our teammates. And beyond just being at odds, God, we don't even like some of them because they have become nothing more than an ideology or a political opinion to us. God, would you forgive us? Would you forgive us for that? Would you allow us to come together? Allow us to sit down, break bread with one another, and live at peace at one another for the sake of the message of Jesus. We pray this in the resurrected name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.